Hey, what's up? This is Kevin from Kevin's Barbecue Joints, and I am really excited to bring you my interview with Dr. Howard Conyers. He's an engineer and educator, and as his Instagram bio says, a pitmaster, but he's not hugely fond of that word, and we discussed that in depth. He's also going to be an author very soon. He has a coffee table book that's coming out called Black Hand in the Pit, as well as another book, sort of a companion piece, but exploring more into the roles that African Americans played in the history of American barbecue. This is so fascinating. It's such an interesting interview. I learned so much about him as well as about barbecue in general from this interview. We also talk about sweet potatoes and how that's an important component to his history and his father. There's so many great things. He talks about cooking a whole cow. It's amazing. He's an amazing guy, super thoughtful. You can tell that the things that he talks about during this interview are things that are rattling around his head a lot. And he's also in the middle of working on the second book, so that's why it's so fresh. So I can't thank him enough for taking the time. I know you're really going to enjoy this. And I have links below to all of his projects and all the ways that you can get a hold of him. And the Kevin's Barbecue Joints podcast and YouTube show is brought to you by Centex Smokers. You can find them on Instagram at CENTEX_smokers. They're based out of Luling, Texas. Right now, his lead time for offset smokers are about 4 to 5 months. Give him a DM. You'll be blown away by his price. And if you look at his Instagram and follow him, you'll see that he makes amazing pits. So again, that's Centex Smokers, as well as Treaty Oak Distilling. They're in Dripping Springs, Texas. You can check them out at treatyoakdistilling.com or at their physical location there in Dripping Springs. Again, that's Treaty Oak Distilling. And if you're enjoying these, please subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button. That way you're notified when these new ones come out. If you're just listening to the podcast, check it out at youtube.com/Kevin's BBQ Joints. I have a website, kevinsbbqjoints.com. But at the end, stay safe. Thank you so much for checking these out. Good afternoon, Dr. Conyers. How are you?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing all right. What is a typical day for you like?
I don't know if you want to know that, Kevin. 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I get up, start writing and working on doing like barbecue stuff related or
just like, well, in general, I was curious.
Yeah. Then I get up and try to listen to some motivational stuff. Then about 5:30, 6 o'clock, I try to go run. And then 7 o'clock, I try to go to work, go my other profession. My real job is engineer. And I do that till like 4 o'clock. And then I do, after that, I kind of get back into the swing of things, see what I miss and catch back up and get back into the world of food, history, and culture.
And work on your book too, right? Are you finished with it?
So that's interesting. I finished. That one is almost finished. It's actually going through editing now, the coffee table book. But I'm writing a more expansive. A coffee table book is a book pretty much full of pictures, as you know.
Yeah.
And it's kind of really to document like my last 8 years of barbecue, pretty much.
Okay.
And as well as I got some historical pictures in there, but it's really kind of so people can understand how much work did I do to really try to focus on looking at the roles that African Americans contribute to American barbecue story.
That's a coffee table book. Is there going to be another book that's a companion book to it?
It might be another companion book, but that's going to be a full-blown book when that comes of everything that I know about barbecue, and I think that's going to be it.
The coffee table book is called Black Hand in the Pit, right?
Yeah, Black Hand in the Pit.
And is it coming out pretty soon?
I hope to have it out by, I was going to say April, but I'm going to try to go for summer. I'm going to try to really go for summer 2020.
I won't hold you to it. Was there something, did I read something that you're going to only have a certain amount of copies available?
Yeah, but I'm starting to wonder. I was saying I was going to do like 1,000 copies of this book because I was going to self-publish it. I wasn't sure if I could manage all of it, but I may have an opportunity to make it so distribution is a little bit easier. But I think part of the reason I didn't want to do nothing but 1,000 copies because I think it's great. I think it'd be like a collector's item. I hope.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be special, so people can really get a glimpse through my eyes, through the work I've done, whether it's cooking, the various ways I have cooked, the various locations, some of the people I have met on this journey. And also you get some really cool essays from some really talented writers. You also get a perspective of like how barbecue is so deeply ingrained in my life. My mama wrote an essay. My mother wrote an essay.
Oh, nice.
And seeing that essay just kind of says like, I don't know life outside of barbecue, kind of, even though we didn't have a restaurant, but it was one of those things that was pretty central. And I mean, when I mean barbecue for myself, let me make sure people know that it was cooking of the whole hog.
Yes, I want to get very into that.
It wasn't cooking ribs. And a lot of people say that's the holy grail of cooking, but Since I was about 4 years old, that's all I ever associated with barbecue.
And were you cooking inside of like a refabricated refrigerator? Is that what your dad was using, or was that?
We took the guts out of an old international refrigerator, probably I'm guessing probably 70s or 80s vintage, might be 70s. It might, yeah, probably late 60s, early 70s. And we took all the insulation and guts out of it, the plastic. We basically, well, I didn't do it. He did it. And he put some bars in there, some fence wire, so you could flip the hog. And so, and some doors to put coals underneath the animal.
But did he put that in the ground, or was that above ground?
That was above ground. That kept people from digging in the ground. The technique was the technique of cooking above ground, direct heat pits, is the exact technique you use for beneath ground, except for what I learned when I went and did it was you can't hear when you're cooking beneath ground like that.
Oh, that's true.
Sounds get a little more faint. And you know, some people make that joke, you're not cooking if you're looking.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
And you can't really look underneath the animal because the animal is pretty much at ground level. And so you can't really stick your head up under it. Like if it's a pit above ground, you could kind of cook underneath. So it's a little harder, but the process works.
But he grew up cooking in pits, right?
Yeah, he grew up cooking in the ground.
In the ground, yeah.
In the ground, almost like a little shallow grave. I refer to a lot as a hole in the ground, but sometimes I'll call it like trench cooking or pit cooking.
Okay.
And trench cooking is almost like a long ditch. It's the same concept as a hole in the ground. They all got about the same depth, but the size change based on the number of animals you need to barbecue.
The length of it and
the length and the width.
Oh, the width too. I guess. Oh, the size of the actual animal. Gotcha.
Yeah, you got to make the hole in the ground or the trench based on the size of the animal you're cooking.
that makes sense. I was thinking more like, I don't know why size, I was thinking quantity, like multiple animals that were cooking at once.
Oh yeah, so that's a function too. So if you got 10 animals, your pit might be 20, 25 feet long. And so when American barbecue was, when barbecue in the South was being creative, that's what you will see like in the old literature, old archival pictures. Well, you'll see like illustrations. And you'll see like 20 or 30 pigs, or they don't necessarily be pigs. They could be goats, cows, lambs, wow. Whatever the plantation elite would donate to the political rally or to the barbecue celebration. That what was going up for being cooked at the event. And so that's the reason you had a long pit.
Let's talk about the history of it, the history that people that are listening to this or watching this probably have zero idea about, where barbecue actually came from. Can you talk about that?
So it's pretty hard to say who. What I'm gonna say first, barbecue was one of those things that I believe through my research that was created on American soil. You got people talk about the word, but I don't like to talk about the word so much because we could coin a word and make it whatever it is versus a technique. And I really like to focus on the technique. A lot of people talk about barbacoa, and I have a lot of respect for barbacoa, but that's a totally different technique of cooking. But to go back to the history of barbecue and the evolution, when the country was coming together, you had three groups of people here. You had the indigenous community, you had indentured servants, and you had enslaved Africans. And this was right around the 1619, 1620 time frame period.
Okay.
This pre-America, this was colonial era. So about the first 40 years, you had those three populations in community, but they wasn't like working together, but they was in community. So there are some things where you might borrow something from another culture, but as colonies grew and slavery actually became a mainstay on this new world, the enslaved Africans was manning those pits from about the 1660, 1670 time frame all the way up to the early 1900s. And really, truthfully, well into the 1960s and 70s, they were cooking the barbecue. They was probably the people who were most known for cooking barbecue. Not necessarily, they wasn't the enslaved in the 1980s, 1990s, but they were still the people who was cooking it. So once they was emancipated, then they become sharecroppers, but they were still manning those pits. They were still cooking in those trenches that you would see in the early barbecues. You would see they were cooking whole animals. They had what was kind of indicative of these early barbecues was all of these barbecues, they generally use a vinegar pepper-based barbecue sauce, and you will see it from the Virginia area all the way up to eastern Texas. You will primarily whole hog. You will see people. There were some things in the literature you hear about people mopping the animal, and the mop was that was how they apply the seasoning. So a lot of guys talk about barbecue, and they say, "Oh, we don't use no sauce," but you got to think about it. Sauce
Yeah.
was really a carrier of the seasonings. And so that is kind of how it was. And then, so the enslaved people did barbecues for plantation owners. They try to get votes, different celebrations, and kind of cater to either 4th of July, Christmas. Those are some of the bigger holidays, harvest festivals. But sometimes the enslaved communities, they would actually, it was a form of passive resistance. Sometimes it was documented, well, it wasn't sometimes, it was documented. They would sometimes steal a hog or two from a plant, barbecue that whole hog for themselves to eat.
Okay, because I was going to ask.
So they would do that, but also during Christmas, sometimes the planters would give them an animal to cook.
Oh.
But over that time period, I was writing about that actually this morning, about the evolution of barbecue and just the technique part of it, because it wasn't something that was, I believe, and I'm treating it as I'm a pitmaster thinking about the different techniques of cooking. They had to evolve it to a certain point, and it took a little bit of time to evolve it, because all around the world, people was cooking meat with fire.
Mm-hmm.
But what you see in the American South, it looked pretty. I haven't seen anything that resembles it in the South at all. Like you talk about, some people talk about they're cooking on tree limbs on a little rack, and you see that like a popular picture.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll find that all over the country, and you find it in the Caribbean, you'll find it in Africa, you'll find it all over, where they're cooking on tree limbs. And I had the privilege to witnessing that in Trinidad. So,
oh really?
With somebody showing me how to do that. So when thinking about, and they were cooking chickens, and when I thought about that as a cook, if you had a hog or a cow or something like that, and it was dripping fat, it's pretty hard to maintain that heat, mm-hmm. because you could have a big flare up. As that once that grease start rendering, that grease will start dropping faster and faster. So if you have it, you could do that for one animal, but you couldn't do that for 20 animals. Mm-mm. I don't see that being manageable. You also have people cooking over like rotisseries where they put a pole through them and they're rotating.
Yeah.
I don't think that's very practical either, because every animal you need like one person to rotate it throughout the whole cooking process, with a fire underneath it. That don't really make sense. And then the other way you would see is they had like this earth-covered oven. And you'll find that kind of tradition all over the world too, in different locations, but you kind of like a steaming technique, and you'll find it in Hawaii, you'll find it in Mexico.
Oh, yeah. With leaves.
The thing about that is, it believes you'll wrap it up, and when you put a heat source in there where it's rocks, or you burn down wood or something like that, and you cover it up with dirt, and you hope that when you open it up, it's done.
Yeah,
and
it is. It is a crapshoot. No, I've seen people like cross their fingers like this. Okay, let's hope it. But that's not a great way to cook.
So you got two possibilities. It may be done, and it's falling apart, or you maybe got a rotten animal in the ground. But if you was an enslaved person, and you did those three things, and you mess up an animal, and you got 4,000 or 5,000. I mean, sometimes they would feed anywhere from several hundred people to 2,000 or 3,000 people. You couldn't afford to mess up, just due to the horrendous treatment of enslaved people during that time. If you messed up, you know good and well that you was gonna have a whipping after the fact. So I believe they perfected the technique because they knew that they need a way to execute perfection over time, but that just didn't come through, I would say it came through trial and error, through iteration.
Didn't you say that they were entertainments or something? What did I hear when you were...
Oh, yeah, they were entertainments. I mean, they did the barbecue, they did the entertainment, they did the music, they did the dancing. I mean, they did everything for the plantation era. They did everything. So it was a job. And you think about it, during that time period, you didn't go to your grocery store and get the animals. You go to the pen, they bring the animals on foot. Somebody had to bring wood to cook the barbecue. Somebody had to dig the trench. Somebody had to bring the tree limbs to actually hold the hog or hold the animals to make the racks. Then you got to kill the animals. Then once you kill the animals, you didn't have refrigeration, so you only got so many hours between the time you kill the animal to cooking. And then once you start cooking, you got depending on how many animals you got to cook, you got a time period for that, and then you got to be ready for whenever time the dinner is going to be served. And so you had to think about that process. But a lot of people don't have that experience or understanding how you have to use the time of the event or the time that you was cooking for and back all the way back up to that time. But growing up, I had a firsthand experience with that, because when I was young, we had a barbecue at 3:00 on Saturday. Mm-hmm. We knew we had to start, could we actually kill the animal? So we had to kill the animal generally like 3 o'clock the evening before.
Okay.
And because we wanted to give ourselves some daylight too, because wherever we kill an animal, they didn't have electricity. So imagine you got to kill an animal for before nightfall.
Yeah.
So we did it kind of in that way, in that vein, and I didn't know at that time and how it related to history, but as I start thinking about it, it made sense that you start at like 3 o'clock that evening before, because you got to boil water, you got to dehair it, you got to gut, you got to slaughter. Then you got to keep it cool. But if you don't have refrigeration or it's not wintertime, then you have to start cooking shortly after you kill an animal. Otherwise, it'll spoil. It's a lot to executing barbecues. So there's a different connection to barbecue when you can see an animal alive 24 hours before you cook it.
For me, I can't even get my head around it. It's fascinating. I've never, and especially coming from Los Angeles, like we don't even know where any of our food comes, and most people don't. Most people don't see animals slaughtered.
Most people don't, and so like it hurts. It hurts me as a person. Like I cook barbecue, but it kind of irks me when people don't really treat animals with respect, or don't eat all parts of the animal. Oh, I only like this part, but the animal gave its whole life for you. But that connection I got with the animal, seeing that animal alive, and though it sacrificed its life, I knew every part of the animal was precious.
Was this in Manning?
Yeah, this was in Paxville, where I grew up at.
Paxville, which is close.
It's close to Manning. So I went to school in Manning, which is about 7 miles away.
Okay.
That was like the county seat. It was a little small town.
And your family had a farm then?
Your family had a farm there.
Was it were you just have hogs, or did you have produce too?
Primarily, my father grew corn and sweet potatoes. Okay. And then I used to run the garden. Yeah, I used to run the family garden for the most part.
Really?
And corn was the like a cash crop. The sweet potatoes were more like a family tradition. My father was carrying this old seed variety for probably about 35, 40 years.
Did he exchange them for tires or something? Did I read that?
Yeah, it was you must be, I'm trying to think where I said that at.
I think the New York Times maybe or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to think.
I can't remember if I said that in the New York Times or not, because I want people to hear that story from my father. I think it's very interesting for people to hear that story, because there are some things more valuable than money, and I think that was one of them.
That's amazing. They're heirloom seeds.
They were heirloom seeds, and I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, Kevin, if those seeds went back into almost near slavery.
That's amazing.
Because you save a little bit of the previous year's crop, and you plant that crop next year. And he got it from an older gentleman in his community for the tires.
Wow.
He was a church member, but it's just crazy when you think about that.
Yeah.
And he died shortly after he got those tires.
It was meant to be that he had those seeds.
It was meant to be. And so, like, my father been growing up since, and I probably going to have to figure out some way to keep it going forward.
I feel completely naive. What do potato seeds look like? Is it from the little, when it flowers? Is that when the...
I call it a seed, Kevin, but the sweet potato is the seed.
The seed itself. Okay, because I planted potatoes before, and I'm thinking, well, am I going crazy? Because you could...
I call it the seed because that's what we would call it, but really the name I probably should have called it, be more accurate, should have called it slips.
Slips?
And the slip is the actual tuber part of the plant.
Oh, okay, cool.
The thing you eat is what you save a little bit of and plant the following year.
Okay.
I mean, you could also, if the weather was warm enough, you could do cuttings, because like sweet potatoes propagate pretty easily from vine cuttings, but generally most people start from the actual sweet potato itself, and you plant a bed.
And those sweet potatoes, are those the one that they don't eat any butter, they don't eat anything, right?
No, they're naturally sweet. They're probably the sweetest potato I have. You don't get a potato like this, and I mean they bred the genetics out of like most sweet potatoes you get today in the store, because everybody want a nice, pretty color sweet potato, nice flesh color. They want it to be like perfectly smooth. Of course, they want a long shelf life and things like that. So with doing that, you kind of breed a lot of the great things out of it.
Seems like they've been doing that for a lot of things. It seems like they've done that for, this is so off topic, but tomatoes and jalapenos.
Everything.
Jalapenos, they've dumbed them down where they're not even spicy. They're just like bell peppers.
Yeah, that's what commodity farming is all about.
Do you currently live in South Carolina, or do you live in New Orleans?
Currently live in New Orleans.
Okay.
I mean, last year in 2020, I went to South Carolina quite a bit just because of COVID, and I couldn't really go any place, and I could work from anywhere, so it made sense for me to go home.
Do you have to go into work now? Like these days? Do you go into work?
No, not yet. So I mean, probably about half the year. I'm not sure when to go back. It just all nobody knows.
I have fingers crossed that things can kind of get back to normal eventually this year. You'd hope.
You hope. I mean, I'm gonna be out there. I'm gonna say I'm just preparing myself mentally till the fall of the year.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing too. I keep telling people like this fall, let's plan on life kind of being a little bit more normal, but I don't think it's going to be May. And I highly doubt it. With your book, the other book that you're working on, are you working on like oral histories too?
In the other book, I'm working on oral history. So like the crazy part, the coffee table book came because I got rejected when I submitted books. That the real book, I mean, I'm gonna call it, both of them are real books, but when I wanted to write like everything I knew about barbecue down, a lot of that book got rejected probably about 5 or 6 times from different publishers. I don't know what it was. They said I didn't know enough about the subject matter.
Really?
And I'm like, I lived in the subject matter.
Yeah.
I didn't have a restaurant, so I guess that didn't make it appealing. But so after being rejected so many times, that's the reason I went to the coffee table book, and I said at some point I'll write the full book. But in some way, Kevin, all those aside, I'm glad they rejected that book. And the reason I'm glad they rejected that book, it wasn't that I didn't know anything, but now what I do know since that time period is much more. Like, let me explain what I mean.
Okay.
When they rejected that book, I think it was in the 2017, 2018 time frame. At that time period, at that time, I didn't never cooked in the ground at that point. And so I went back and cooked in the ground probably on 3 different occasions.
Okay.
And so that allowed me to get a firsthand knowledge of the perspective of what my father did as well as my enslaved ancestors. Also during that time period, I started cooking the other animals that they talked about in the literature. They cook every animal. They were talking about lambs, goat, sheep, hogs, chickens, and turkeys. So growing up, we cooked primarily hogs. I mean, I witnessed a goat being cooked once or twice, not many times. Deer maybe once or twice, but not a whole lot. Turkey we did quite a bit, but I never seen a lamb being cooked or a cow being cooked, a whole cow. So going through that due diligence to cooking the goat and cooking the lamb was not a challenge. The lamb was actually easier to cook than the goat because it's a little more forgiving, it's a little more fattier. But to get that experience firsthand, to understand that process, and then to me to go and cook the whole cow, that was amazing. I would say that is the holy grail of barbecue. That's the best barbecue anybody could eat. The history book said it was the best barbecue to eat, and I will vouch for that. It is the best barbecue to eat. You can't really imagine it. I mean, you can't imagine if you could imagine having the best cuts of steak and 1 or 2 bites of food.
That's what I was going to say. I remember you saying that's what it was. It was like having the best cuts of steak all at once.
All at once. And so to go through the trouble to design a pit and everything like that, and my father built the pit to cook a cow, that was special. And so that knowledge now, that since it haven't really been done the way I did it, like some people do it like a Sato style, but the way I did it was pretty much the exact same way my ancestors would have done it, except for instead of it being in the ground, we put it above ground in an engineered pit. Not no high-tech engineered pit, but like, because some people might say engineering, they might think it had insulation, thermometers, but it didn't have any of that. It just had a mechanism to help turn it easier.
To turn it, right, yeah.
And so, because they talked about it in the literature, they used to flip the animals every so many hours. Well, they didn't say how many hours, but they said they used to flip it. But I knew why they flipped the animal based on how they filled the trench up with wood and burn it down and to get the embers start, to get the heat source in there. Because they was cooking open pit. They didn't have no lid to help keep heat in.
Yeah.
So when you do that kind of stuff, you have to think about it. And going through that knowledge could be, in my mind, instead of going in the cemetery, it could be in the book.
Yes.
And future generations of people could understand the process. I'm actually share that process of like, I may not share like the overall recipe of how the sauce I made for, cause I made a very historical sauce for that particular animal, but I will give my methodology, why I did certain things, and because it came out perfect. And I think people need to know that. And what it does, it just shows you the direct lineage of American barbecue up to about the 1960s and 70s. And I think, I mean, if I had to say a specialty, I'm probably a specialist in Southern barbecue from probably the first 350 years. I mean, from not first 350 years, but probably from 1670 something to like the 1960s and 70s. Because I lived where I grew up at, and the kind of being a receiver of oral tradition, as well as going back and doing a lot of research to fill in a lot of gaps, probably know a good bit.
Yeah, no, I think
I have pieced together everything that I didn't know. I think I pieced together through experimentation.
through that and through diligent research. You're a voracious reader, obviously, and you're interested in, like, I love researching. Certain people don't like to research things at all. I love researching, and this is something you're so passionate about. And I think I keep talking about things I've read or things that I've seen with you, but didn't you, like you just said, with you don't want to take it to the grave. These are things that if you're not talking about it and you don't write about it, it goes away. Like people.
I think it will go away ultimately. If I don't put it in a book, it will go away. Most of the stuff a lot of the stuff I do know was passed orally, and so I know if it's orally, it's definitely going into the cemetery. And even then, like, my father taught me everything he knew about something, but he didn't know how far it went back. He also didn't know, like, when we went to cook the cow that time, he came down, but he didn't have no idea how to cook the cow. He just kind of like trusted me in that process. He said, "This is your thing. I mean, I don't know anything about this, and I'm just here for the instruction."
Well, he's a welder too, so
he's a welder. He's like, "I'm gonna build a pit. Oh, for you cooking it, that's on you." And it was a lot of money on the line. It wasn't no competition, but it was a lot of personal money and sweat. Gumbo Jubilee, I did an event for that, and it was special. I mean, if I don't cook too much barbecue anymore, which would be sad to some people, say like, "You maybe such a remarkable cook." I'm content though. I mean, I'm at peace with. I don't want to die. Don't say it like that. But like,
no, I know.
I'm content with how many more. I don't have anything to prove for cooking barbecue anymore. I think when I went through my journey, I knew what a pitmaster was, and I think this is important for your audience to understand. Like, pitmaster is a word that's a fairly new word. Mm-hmm. Growing up, we didn't have that term pitmaster, and I'm probably gonna write about it more. But like the word pitmaster, if you think somebody was enslaved on a plantation, no plantation owner is not gonna ever call the people cooking their meat the pitmaster at all.
For sure. For
one. But then the other part of it is it's a new word that came about because of media. And media has a very important role in the role of barbecue, the history of barbecue, the people players in barbecue. I mean, I see a lot of people call themselves pitmasters, but I don't really know if they're truly pitmasters, because the people who I think are truly pitmasters, they grew up in my community. They like my father. They like people like my father who have cooked in the ground without any thermometers, without any specialized gadgets. And it really doesn't matter the conditions they cooked in, because when you cook outside, where we was cooking at, sometimes we didn't have the best weather conditions.
No, I can't imagine. You can't.
I mean, sometimes it'd be raining, it's cold, it's windy. It's very unpredictable. It's not the confines. And then with me cooking publicly for the past 8 years, it's been challenging because sometimes you get invited. Say you're coming from the South and I'm going up to Denver, Colorado, and that has a different altitude.
True.
So that has a different effect. You don't have your personal equipment, so you got to take that variable out of the equation. So it really comes down to that person and the skill. And so I think, like, to me, a lot of people use the word pitmaster and put it on a business card or thing. I don't really know if they're a pitmaster. And I tell any of them that. And I don't even, sometimes I've been thinking about here recently, I don't even know if I like the word pitmaster anymore. I don't like but I adopted it and use it because I would say to myself, I have proved to myself what it takes to be a pitmaster. Yeah. And very few individuals could probably say they went through the things that I went through. Yeah, you cooking a rib, a chicken, a turkey, some brisket. But when you start cooking those whole animals, it's a whole other ball game. And then when you start cooking them in the ground, that's a different ball game. Then you design the pit to cook it on, that's a whole nother ball game. Yes. And if your father building and you testing it out with your father during the design phase, and you don't even try out the pit to cook on before you cook the whole animal, that's a whole nother thing. You just got to, you're going on pure gut and feel and instinct and knowledge.
How long did that cow take you?
About 24 hours, I think, 20 to 24 hours.
How could you tell when it was done? Like, what, I guess you just knew?
You kind of know. The whole, everything, the fat renders in a different way. The crazy part, Kevin, like the air smells different. You could tell when the animal is cooking because the meat smells different. And I have talked to some people who said they could tell when an animal is burning based on the smell, and I believe they're right.
Yeah.
You can smell certain things when you're cooking. And so that's the reason I tell people all the time, the best pitmaster use their five senses. Well, you can't use your tongue or whatever, but your eyes, your nose, your hearing, and your hand. I mean, you get a good sense of how the animal is doing and how it's reacting to the cooking environment.
Can we talk a little bit about what's the 100 Acres project? Because that's still, their funding's still available for that, right? Isn't that?
Oh yeah. The 100 Acres project is like one of my passion projects. Well, it's not really a passion project. It's a thing that I really want to see alive in the American South. A lot of black farmland in the South has been lost over the years. But I want to create a new vision for rural America with small family farmers. They could be black, white, because truth be told, Kevin, after a while, small white family farmers are going to get placed out of business too. You compete with the large corporations, the large farmers. But you need to do something where you grow a product and you value add it. You have the processing capability to make it valuable more than taking the raw ingredient and converting it some way. I want 100 acres because I think that number makes sense to me as a start for the product, for the incubator. So you got to have a manufacturing facility on site. And so I want to build a manufacturing facility on site that supports those 100 acres. So everything I grow on that 100 acres, I could use in that manufacturing facility. And if I have any waste, I can spread it back out over that 100 acres. So it's kind of like a closed loop system.
And you have that specific, you have that land picked out, right?
I figure I'm gonna raise the money first, and when I have the money, that makes it a lot easier for me to go after the land. I feel like the land will show up. Yeah, I did a GoFundMe, and that project is really important to me. I think it just means a whole lot to my community. I think it's sometimes you got to think outside the box.
Oh yeah.
And I think I'm gonna say this. I know the manufacturing part. I can't say what the manufacturing part is, but I already built the incubator for it, the manufacturing incubator for it.
Oh.
And it's small scale, but I believe sometimes it's okay to start small.
Mm-hmm.
You leverage your risk by going small instead of going to a major multi-million-dollar facility where you're in a whole bunch of debt.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I feel like it's a proof of concept. I believe if it works, it's going to be really successful, and it's going to probably be a model of different ways to do things. And ultimately, like when I have the 100 acres, the other part of the 100 acres I want to do is when I do decide to cook barbecue, I want to cook barbecue on that particular grounds and invite people from across the country to the American South to enjoy food, music, and culture in the American South, to see what it's all about. I know people go out to Coachella with things with normal, Burning Man, but I think it'd be kind of cool to see people in the South, because the South is where American history started. Mm-hmm. You can't really understand the problems in America without understanding the South.
And a lot of people have never visited the South.
Really?
I think so. I think there's a lot of people that have never, you know that. There's a lot of people that have probably, that stay in their just bubble. I know people that have never left California. I know.
And I get it, because the South has such a very bad reputation. I can see some people, I have heard some stories where some like black families, they have told I read a story, I think yesterday, where somebody told their daughter, instead of going back to the South, her family migrated from the South to the North. And her daughter said she was going back, and her mother told her to go to Bahamas or something
instead
for vacation to the South. And then all of a sudden, I think she was part of the group that went back to Atlanta or somewhere about 6 years ago. Okay. So it was pretty fascinating to hear that people said that they didn't necessarily go to the South. And then I think I even remember my wife's grandfather talking about the South was just a whole nother animal. He grew up in Cleveland, but never really going back to the South. It was a different conversation, but I treat the South with a lot of respect, because I don't drive me different places in the rural South at nighttime because of the racist history of America, past, present, and current. I can't even say future, but with the current landscape, some places I just don't travel at nighttime in the South.
Not terrible.
Yeah, it's places, any place across the country, but I just personally choose. It's just a more survival thing. You learn how to deal with certain things.
But also, I would love for people to see America more too. I think it helps people get a better worldview if they've traveled to the South as well as the Midwest. Like, I think that everyone wants to go to Europe or
I
Or
think America need to actually, there's a big problem in America. I think a lot of Americans don't understand each other. And I
yeah,
think people from the rural South need to understand people. I mean, people from California need to go to the Midwest,
yeah.
the Northwest. They need to come to the South. There's a big urban and rural divide that people don't often think about. And I think it's irregardless of the South or the Northeast. I think if people could just visit other places that are less populated, you'll gain a better perspective of individuals.
Do you think that African American pitmasters have been overlooked?
It's a problem all over the country, it's really media, Kevin. It's people, but it's media too. The role of media has a big responsibility to help controlling what is being represented. And media and access, those are the two things. And the reason I say media and access, because there's two things going on. You have media, and then you have like access. And access, what I mean for is barbecue, particularly like competition barbecue. When you go to these competition barbecue events, you don't really see a whole lot of African Americans at those competition barbecues. And so if they're not there, and the reason they're not there, my belief is that the equity, the money. It costs money to compete in those competitions. It's not like it's a trivial thing. I did a couple of barbecue competition. There was a fundraiser. I knew my father probably would never have done anything like that without me. And I will say, like, I'm not wealthy or rich at all, but I had a few extra coins I could have donated to the cause. It's an added expense that you don't really account for. And if you can't get sponsors to help offset your costs, you can't really do it.
And I think too that certain barbecue places become highlighted, and then they become like this gold standard or a place that everyone wants to go, instead of going to these off the beaten path places, which I wish people. That's my goal, and with some projects that I'm working on too. I want people to travel further away, not just go to the 17 names or 45 names that they've heard.
Yeah, I mean, like even like in Texas, for example. And I mean, I love people to visit some off-beaten places on the East Coast. But like people need to go to Lockhart. People talk about Austin, and they talk about like Aaron Franklin, but y'all really need to go out in Smitty's or Cruz or. I mean, they all come from the blacks. They all come from the same family, but it's off the beaten path. But you kind of have to go to those off the beaten paths to really get a true understanding of what barbecue was, where it's going, and I think you get to see the beauty of the country too.
And the open road and going down to Lockhart, it's beautiful. I drove by myself, and these old buildings, and I think shiny and new to me isn't wonderful. I like things that are tarnished and stand the test of time, and like Lockhart with Schmitty's, their pits are like, they're so dangerous to children.
Right there.
Yeah, like I keep thinking, a little kid could just walk.
All those aside, that was pretty cool to see their pits in the restaurant. You can't miss it. You got to walk by it. I'm like, wow, that's definitely grandfathered in.
So grandfathered.
Because nobody could build that into a restaurant.
No way. There's no way.
No health partner not going to allow that. No safety organization not going to allow that. Those kind of places, the only way you're going to see that is if you travel.
No, for sure.
It's kind of like when I did a whole hog barbecue tour of myself. I went because I wanted to kind of get a grasp of what barbecue looked like with the last few remaining black pitmasters in the country who practiced that craft. But it was in rural areas. It was kind of isolated. They were community staples. They were thriving businesses, but they didn't get the media coverage. I learned fairly quickly how much media coverage matters. Just at first I didn't get it, but I'm like, why? Because I was like, I don't have a restaurant. Why y'all want to write a story or talk to a rocket scientist who cooks barbecue? I've been cooking barbecue almost 30-something, probably about 34, 35 years, or been around it for 34, 40, 35 years since I was 4. And I'm like, that's not really that interesting thing to me. But other people's like, oh, this is just phenomenal. You on one side of the brain is very traditional, old school style barbecue, but you working in innovation and technology. And so once I realized that, and I said, okay, I'd have an opportunity to make sure people, I guess you would say, I really don't want them to know me. That's the crazy part. I really wish in some regards that people didn't know who Howard Conyers was in regards to barbecue. I wish they would knew the people who came before me.
But that's what you're doing.
I mean, thanks. And I know they will get to know me through all this work I have done. I mean, whether the series I did with PBS a couple of years ago, or the numerous articles, this online whether it's Bon Appetit, the New York Times, or Southern Living, whatever it is. There's a lot of articles out there, but like I always try to highlight the people before me who came out, and that's when I finished this second book. I really want to kind of talk about like the people that I met on this journey, some of their stories, because like one of the places closed, and I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get in contact with that particular individual again. I don't know if he passed away. You never know. And I felt like when I went in there, I went into like a barbecue museum. I went into his pit house, and I looked at it, and I looked at his pits, and it looked like he took his pits literally out of the ground and put them above ground. That's what the pits looked like. That was Jack Cobb and Son in Farmville, North Carolina. So like you'll see those old barbecue pictures that had like tree limbs going across their barbecue pits.
Yeah.
But then eventually those tree limbs became metal pipes. And in his place, he had metal pipes on top of cinder blocks.
Oh, wow.
And you kind of like, wow, this is, he just literally took, and I can't, the thing about it, I can't even remember if in his spot, were the cinder blocks even mortared together?
Just stacked?
They would just stack like Legos. And I know there's another place that I went to, that their pits, and that was probably like 3 years ago. I need to go back and visit them. They got some good barbecue. But their blocks were not mortared together either.
That's interesting. Do you think there's a reason?
What I would say, what I have learned, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
You learn how to compensate for that heat escape.
It's just how these guys put their pits together.
It's just how they built them, and I think it just maybe they didn't want to take the time. If you think about it, if you dig a hole in the ground, your heat may not escape number one way. If you don't mortar the joints together on the cinder blocks, you get a different set of factors. But sometimes people have different height between the coals as well as the meat itself. So I done seen some people cook kind of shallow, like I would say 16 inches from with direct heat, 16 inches all the way up to like 48 inches, but not 48, probably like 32 inches. 32 inches, that'd be like courses of blocks. I think when I did the cow, I think I did something a little bit different. I can't remember the exact the separation distance from the coal pile to the cow, but I wanted to have enough clearance so when I turn it, that it would go through the ashes.
Well, I think also too that makes a lot of sense. Well, and I think a lot of people too have never even physically seen a burn barrel.
Yeah, and that's another thing. The burn barrel is just a tool. Like growing up, I didn't even see a burn barrel growing up. That was a later iteration.
Oh, really?
Yeah, growing up, we used to stack wood in a certain manner, like slanted. It's hard to describe, and I'm probably gonna have to draw this out for my next book.
Okay.
And you stack the wood in a certain manner, and as the wood burn, the wood serves as the grate, and the coals drop between the wood.
Oh. That's interesting. And then and then you would shovel it would you stack the woods? Would you stack it underneath the animal, or was this to the side and then you brought
to the side of the animal, the side, off to the side somewhere? It serves the exact same purpose as the burn barrel, but you didn't use a burn barrel. And so we used to cut tree limbs probably like about 6 feet long and about 3 or 4 inches in diameter. Yeah, that's the right word, diameter. And we'll stack them in like a slant. One end would maybe like prop up on like a row of cinder blocks, or before that you would take an old like the trunk of the tree and you'll stack above there, and you will form a pile, basically like it's almost like a little ramp. Okay. You'll make a tree pile that look like a ramp, but as it burned down, you actually have a kind of like a rack, and eventually you take the pieces that fall down and put it back to the top. And you keep replenishing those pieces of wood.
Well, it worked.
And it worked.
Isn't that funny? I love how people are resourceful. That's so, because you did, and burn barrels that would be interesting to know how far back, like when burn barrels first started. Like when was the first use of burn barrels?
I would probably say a burn barrel had to be probably 60s or 70s. So? You got to think about the burn barrel. If you say a 55-gallon, you got to think about when a 55-gallon drum came on the market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then if you had a barbecue restaurant, you had to think about when those fuel tanks came on the market, like for like kerosene or oil. Mm-hmm. So you can't have those things before they're invented, they're repurposed.
Yes.
And that's going to be a very interesting chapter in my book, as I talk about how America grew, how barbecue changed, and you can see how barbecue is changing now because of technology.
Technology, yeah.
I mean, you got PNID controllers, you You got Bluetooth controllers.
People I know
You got
people that
damp.
yeah they get people get texts like when their food is ready in certain pits.
Yeah, so I mean, you can see the influence of technology
Mm,
on like barbecue. As an engineer, I love that aspect of it. As a traditional cook, I hate
yeah,
it.
yeah.
I do get both sides of the equation, just given my nature of my brain.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Understand, and it's nice that your brain can live in those worlds. That you can. It's a nice place to be able to be because not everyone can. And do you want to talk at all about? Yeah, most people can. You're doing something with Kevin Bledsoe, right?
Yeah, we're doing something, preserve the pit. Yeah, Kevin Bledsoe, the mentor of that. It's an initiative Kingsford is doing. I'm working with Kingsford to highlight the contributions of African Americans in barbecue, as well as help Black barbecue businesses, in particular Black barbecue professionals, enter this profession, where they'll get some mentorship, one-on-one training, as well as some access to some undisclosed amount of capital. And
Gotcha.
so it's a good program. It's a good idea for a major corporation to help try to level the playing field.
That's ongoing right now, right?
Yeah, starting right now. I don't know when it's going to air, but applications are being accepted till like March 1st.
March 1st. Is that March 1st?
Yeah,
Okay.
applications up till March 1st.
I saw that you were associated with it, and then I know Kevin from a long time ago, and so I thought it was just I knew that I saw his name, and so then there's other restaurants across the United States too that are doing mentorship.
Yeah, there's a couple other people doing mentorship, and you got there's some other mentors. You got Brian
Oh, Brian
Furman,
is. Okay.
Rashad Jones, Davita Davison, and Amy Mills.
Oh, really?
You know Amy Mills?
Uh huh. Yeah, yeah. I was lucky enough when I first started my blog to do an interview with Mike Mills. It was an audio one only, and I just transcribed it. I've been trying to locate it. It's on an old computer, but yeah, I've known Amy for a long time, and I've wanted to visit their restaurant, and I never got a chance to personally meet Mike.
He was a nice gentleman. I mean, I met him probably must be 3 or 4 years ago. No, I stopped. When the last time I did this event? I probably met Mike in probably 2015, 2016 time frame. And then I met him again in Memphis in May. I mean,
Oh,
I didn't cook in Memphis in May, but I just went to Memphis in May and see what it was all about because I wanted to hear what this whole competition, the biggest barbecue competition in the country and maybe in the world was all about.
was it overwhelming? I haven't gone.
It's a bit much, but I think like you can have a lot of fun if you know a lot of people. If
Hmm.
you don't, I don't think it's well thought out for like the public because this is a barbecue event and like the teams are so caught up in cooking because they want to win this world championship. But if you don't really know anybody, you don't get any good food,
And which is a big part of it. Yes, definitely.
which is I think is a big part of it. I mean, I went and I had a great time because I knew so many different teams. But I don't know if everybody gonna have that luxury and privilege. I mean, I will say that is a luxury and privilege I have, but I think that is something a lot of people don't have.
I do all my interviews I've done a couple hundred of these, and I do them with glasses on. So when I don't wear glasses, I don't wear them normally when I'm out and about, only when I read. And I've seen people in public that I've interviewed; they had no idea who I was. I talked to them for like 20 minutes, and then I put my glasses on, and I said, "I'm Kevin." They're like, "Oh, okay." You're that weird guy in California that has been bugging me to interview. Is there anything that you want to let people know about, or all the information about how to get a hold of you and how to? I'm going to put all the links that I know of below. But is there anything we missed?
I mean, I think you talked about everything. My website, howardconyers.com. I think my Instagram is CarolinaQ_PhD. I'm trying to think. Like you mentioned everything, the coffee table book. If people want to see like some of my work visually, you got Nourish, that series that was
Oh
done
yeah,
two
yeah.
years ago. But I think I want people to understand about barbecue. I think it's something. The thing I really want people to start thinking about, and I'm really start working toward this. I want to see, and you may disagree with me, but I believe barbecue is the national dish of the United States of America.
No, I agree with you.
And the reason I say it's should be the national dish, not only in words but through policy, through law, is because it's the dish that pretty much has been the United States through its development from day one, pre-United States. It was kind of created on these soils. It's the dish that when we have our major national holidays, that's that's the thing that is kind of the focal point. It's a celebratory as the 4th of July, Memorial Day, Labor Day, a barbecue or a cookout or something occurs during that time period. I think it should be the national dish. And I think it also is an opportunity to educate the American public on like food and where it comes from, because I think people sometimes lose sight how valuable the farmer is in that equation.
That's something I feel like I
Yeah.
need to do, is reach out to more farmers, especially now with COVID. Things have changed. People don't realize that there's someone that's supplying the food for these restaurants, or the animal for the restaurant. I would love to just
Or
at
for your
least,
grocery store.
or for the grocery. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it doesn't magically appear in the grocery store.
I think people lose sight. I think that's what I want to be able to do through that and through that work. I want to try to figure out how to make that a thing, because I think it's a great opportunity to educate people
I agree.
about farmers and the role they do to supply food to our food chain, to our systems. And it is various levels. It's not just small farmers. It could be family farmers. It could be large corporate farms. But you get the education that you could get from that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot. And I think barbecue itself could give a lot for educating people on American history. And I know people don't necessarily want to always talk about race or whatever, but it's the reality of the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
And barbecue is one of those dishes that's been there from the beginning. But it also may be the dish that can unify us all together. If you have a great plate of barbecue, people will cross racial lines, and people have crossed racial lines to get good barbecue over the years. Even when America had some of its darkest hours during segregation, people will cross racial lines to go get good barbecue.
That's very true. If there's anything I could do to spread something, or to, I have an audience somehow.
I think the reason you got an audience, Kevin, I don't know you, but if you've been doing it for 3 years and you consistency and discipline means a lot. We probably wouldn't be talking if I wasn't consistently talking about this message of like the roles of African Americans in barbecue. I probably, for the first for the last 8 years, I was probably one of the few people who was really championing that message, with sole focus on that one message, not necessarily like deviating from it. I had to be a cheerleader for it no matter what, even though like other people got books coming out this year on barbecue, and they may mention that, but like I really kind of took it upon myself, and I took it upon myself because of where I grew up at. It wasn't necessarily about them knowing who I am, but when you grow up and you're so deeply connected to barbecue, I don't know too many people who are connected to the history of barbecue quite like me. And when I look at the research, I look at the old literature, it was a lot of things I could fill in from the literature just because that's what I saw.
Personally.
Like how we kill hogs was almost identical to what they did in the late 1800s, which was like crazy.
It's
like
amazing.
This was been in the 1980s, and we were still killing hogs in almost the identical manner they was doing in the 1800s.
That's amazing, and that's amazing. Yeah, that you were there, and you say that you don't want to be a focal point, and you want the people that came before you, but you are their voice. You are their voice right now, and without you, they don't speak. They don't. It goes away.
Yep. So that's kind of what I want people to take away. So like that's what I kind of committed myself in this barbecue stuff. And when I finish this first book, gonna be great. You get to see it visually. You get to see a lot of exciting things because like a lot of people don't read, Kevin. That's just the honest truth.
I know. It's so sad. I know.
But I think the next book, like I would dump out a lot of stuff, just a lot of stuff. Like even like I hear things and it hurts me when I hear this, and this is gonna be the last point. Somebody famous pitmaster, he talked about famous chefs talk about, oh, barbecue come from straps, and I'm just like, what part of the history did barbecue come from straps? Because they were cooking whole animals that was donated, and they was cooking 15 to 20 of them, depending on how big the event was. So that wasn't a strap. They maybe had leftovers that the people was eating, but if you was cooking, I'm gonna say it like this: if you were cooking a cookout at your house or a family dinner at your house, and your mom cooked something special, you might, if it's something really good, you might take you some out the pot to start with before you put out to the public. Sure. Yeah. I mean, you might not do that, but I do that if For sure. And so imagine you was an enslaved person. They were cooking 15 to 20 animals, and the slave master or owner wasn't out there. You're going to cut you some stuff off the top and send back to your family to re-reel with you, be honest with you. And that wasn't the strap. So you're getting the best stuff. And then after the event is over, you're getting stuff. And then if there was any straps in the barbecue, it would have been they would made other dishes
Yeah,
from it, and
repurpose it. Yeah.
they would make chitlins, they maybe would make hog head cheese, they would make sauce, they would make something called liver pudding. Some people might make liver mush. I grew up eating liver pudding, barbecue hash,
Hmm.
those kind of dishes. I mean, I better should say what barbecue hash is, just because people may not know what barbecue hash is. But barbecue hash is basically almost like I'm gonna say it a stewed down version or a meat gravy that's made from traditionally was made from the head, the liver, and the lights, which will equate to the lungs.
Okay.
And it's a very old dish, and sometimes people throw kidneys in there, but it's a very old dish that we would eat. We would prepare when we did barbecues, and we would serve it over rice or grits. You don't get it in that traditional sense because the USDA don't allow you to have lungs anymore when they process
Oh,
due to
interesting.
the diseases in the lungs that they could carry. But you also see some people making hash, and they have different variations. They don't put the organ meat in there because their customer base may not eat it. So I get that. Some people put potatoes in it. I don't understand that, but hey, that's them. They could do that. Everybody have their little nuance, but that's kind of what it is. And so I think people need to kind of take it for what it is, enjoy barbecue, recognize the history of it, recognize the people in it, and see how we can make the world better through barbecue.
Definitely. And also too, once you are able to travel again, travel off the beaten path.
Some of the best barbecue you'll find.
Best barbecue you find, and these places need business. They'll go away if they don't have business.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think you're right, Kevin. People need to go visit these barbecue businesses off the beaten path because they will go away. And that made me think about something with like some of these old animals. Some of these old heirloom crops went away because there was no market for them. If you create a market for them, they'll stay.
True.
If you don't create a market for them, they will go away. And that's the same thing with barbecue.
That's exactly the same thing. That's a great way to wrap it up. I thank you so much for taking the time. I've wanted to talk to you for a while, and I'm glad you shared this Tuesday with me. Have a great day, and thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you too, Kevin. Have a great afternoon.